But as the years went by, the fire began to make the town more and more uninhabitable. Carbon monoxide levels in the area were sky high, to the point where people were basically breathing at their own risk. And when there was a shortage of carbon monoxide monitors, people started relying on canaries to see if the level of poison gas were enough to kill the birds. People's houses, once straight and on rock-solid foundations, started to tilt. Homeowners watched in fear as their lawns began to turn brown, the patches of dead grass growing like a stain that inched closer and closer to their houses. They wondered what would happen once the fire hit their foundations, their pipes, their gas lines. In a truly gruesome turn, graves started sinking into the swirling pit of fire below Centralia's cemeteries. And in 1981, 12-year-old Todd Domboski nearly died when the smoking ground he was standing on gave in under his feet, sucking him into a smoke-filled sinkhole. People in town panicked and started to let their imaginations get the best of them. Rumors and conspiracy theories swirled around town like superheated embers. Centralia's hardworking families wondered if this was somehow the government's way of pushing them out so that they could get their hands on the coal without paying a fair price. In 1980, the federal government's Bureau of Mines officially declared that they'd failed to do anything to stop the fire that was burning under Centralia for the past 18 years. They said the only option left was to stop trying to put it out and let it burn out on its own. And that wouldn't happen for a very, very long time. The fire was being fueled by a huge supply of coal and gas underground. It went as deep as 300 feet and covered 6 square miles of Centralia. Scientifically speaking, it probably wasn't going to burn out on its own for another 250 years. The best that the government's top experts could do at that point was to let it run its centuries-long course. They actually called the proposal the do-nothing operation. And in 1983, the Pennsylvania state government adopted the do-nothing proposal, which was not that encouraging. But at least they knew that they couldn't just let people stay in a town that was burning underground and had dangerous levels of carbon monoxide hanging in the air above ground. So they switched goals from putting the fire out to getting the people out. No one was forced to leave at first. In 1984, the federal government gave $38.9 million to Pennsylvania's governor to basically buy Centralia. People could sell their homes to the state and start a better life in a neighboring town, one that hadn't been on fire for the past 22 years. It didn't take much to talk a lot of the Centralia residents into this deal. But of course, there were some residents who insisted that they would never leave Centralia. It had been their family's home for generations. They weren't about to be forced out. So they hung on, knowing in their bones that the only way they'd leave Centralia was in a body bag. 2 residents who decided to stay in Centralia after everyone was being strongly encouraged to leave were John and Bertha Mayernick. They were a couple in their late 60s who rented half a duplex in town. For Bertha, Centralia was the only home she'd ever known. It was part of who she was as a person. Her family had lived there for generations and had run the local grocery store. So even as the town was disappearing, she insisted that she wasn't leaving. She felt that it was her duty to stay. If she left, history would leave with her. There would be no more stories and no more life. The town would die for real. And she couldn't live with that. The problem was their landlord who sold their house and they didn't have enough money to buy their own place back. So they were ordered to pack up and go. John thought it was the right thing to do. Centralia wasn't in his blood the way that it was in Bertha's. But Bertha stood firm, even as the notices started to pile up and the sheriff had threatened to remove them by force. If anyone wanted Bertha Mayernick out of Centralia, they would have to take drastic measures. Unfortunately, there was someone who managed to do just that. On October 12, 1987, Bertha and John had a fight about the most recent eviction notice and Bertha's refusal to leave. As the fight escalated, John suddenly grabbed a knife and lunged at Bertha. Bertha was shocked, but her reflexes kicked in, and she put her hands in front of her face to defend herself. Sadly, it did nothing to protect her. John stabbed Bertha in the face and neck, right through her hands. It was too much for Bertha to overcome, and she died from her wounds. Before the reality of what he'd done could sink in, John got in his car and peeled out of the driveway. He drove until he hit the outskirts of town. Then he parked. He reached for a can of gasoline that he kept in the car, and without getting out, he poured the gasoline over his head and lit a match. John's body was found in his still burning car. Bertha was found stabbed to death in her living room.
If you're brave enough, subscribe now. Just search for @Crimehouse Studios on YouTube. And remember, reality is the real horror.